So I did a lot of Pac-Man videos last year, and you might have noticed a certain theme.
This, on the other hand, was by far one of the worst 100% quests I have ever played in a Pac-Man game. In this game designed around completionism, it is unnecessary and even ill-advised to 100% complete this game. I hate myself. I have all of the trading cards in Pac-Man World 3.
Yeah, so I've been 100%ing a lot of the Pac-Man games lately, and there are two reasons for this. One, I've completely lost my mind. I blame life. But secondly, this is a series that ever since the beginning was built on completionism and perfectionism. I mean, the goal of the original is to eat all of the dots and to do it well. So I've grown interested in how this applies not just to the maze games, but also the platformers. After all, those traits very easily apply to that genre too. So with that, let's take a look at how well the Pac-Man platformers pull this off, and whether or not I'm even able to do it to begin with. We'll start with the first Pac-Man platformer, Pac-Land. Because this is an arcade game, there isn't really a 100% goal. So here, we'll just be trying to get through each distinct stage. Pac-Land is a very fun game with a good degree of experimentation to encourage players to be thorough with their surroundings. With it being such an early platformer, the controls are a little odd, but overall they work, and are easy enough to get to grips with. The issue is they aren't well equipped for precision platforming, especially in comparison to its contemporaries. However, this generally isn't too much of a problem here, until you reach Trip 5. Despite only 5 trips being visible on the Trip Select screen, there are actually 8. I like to divide Pac-Land into 2 halves. Trips 1 through 4 are like Super Mario Bros. It's fun, well executed, there are some annoying quirks, but it's generally a really good time. Trips 5 through 8, on the other hand, are like the Lost Levels, where it's a nightmarish hell zone of cheap level design from which there is no escape. Send help. I don't think I even need to say more, as the footage speaks for itself. The controls are not equipped for what's expected out of you, and even if that wasn't the case, what's expected out of you is absurd. But hey, if you're playing the TurboGrafx 16 version, you do get an ending. Wow, so worth it. But hey, if you want to just completely torture yourself, you can try this on the faster and harder US version. I'd recommend that you don't, but it's there in case you like the taste of your own blood. The TurboGrafx 16 version also has Pac-Land Pro, and no. So that was surprisingly agonizing, but at least we can calm down with the next game, oh dear god. Yeah, when I was working on the Pac-Man Museum Plus video, I decided to go above and beyond. While the collection doesn't require beating Pac-in-Time for 100% completion, I did it anyway. Also, yes, because I did this in Museum Plus, that means I did it playing the even harder Japanese version. Don't try this at home, kids. Like with Pac-Land, there isn't a real 100% aim. So like with that one, the goal was simply to beat it. Unlike Pac-Land though, this is an Amiga-style Euro platformer, and frankly, that's not a bad fit for Pac-Man. A lot of those games are characterized by maze-like level design, so to incorporate Pac-Man maze mechanics and elements in that setting makes sense. Also, for the record, I'm not including the DOS and Game Boy versions, as they're just a reskin of Fury of the Furries for the Amiga, but I will cover its core differences aside from, well, the entire game being different. The original game is more linear and puzzle-based, and there's not really much reason to do anything other than get to the end. There are dots to collect for extra lives, but that's about it. That said, it's not a terrible time. It's not Turrican 2, Super Frog, Rough and Tumble, or Fire and Ice, but it's closer to that end of the spectrum than something like Top Banana. The Amiga is weird and I love it. The Super Nintendo game shares the same mechanics, but it's structurally different. You're put in a labyrinthine stage where you have to avoid ghosts and eat all of the Pac dots in order to progress. Not a bad idea. The execution, on the other hand, is another story. While the mechanics are very fun to mess around with and the physics-oriented nature of them lends itself to a lot of potential, the level designers expect way too much out of the players way too early. This was clearly a game where the designers were very in tune with the mechanics to the point where they got complacent with them and forgot what a new player's starting point would be. The game doesn't do a good job of introducing concepts to the player. leaving the player bashing their head against a wall until they get fed up, look up a walkthrough, and blow a fuse in frustration at the solution. Even with that knowledge, however, the level design varies heavily in quality. The crucial problem is the levels are often claustrophobic and cumbersome to navigate while having controls that benefit from having a lot of space. So while World 2 and 3 may be nightmarish, World 4 on the other hand is far more enjoyable just due to the greater space to play around with. This was an interesting idea, and there is stuff to like here, but it's too long and too frustrating to really recommend. Pac-Man World is where 100% completion becomes more of a factor here. This game defined what future attempts would look like for a long time, and for good reason. In so many different ways, it set an amazing standard. I've talked about this game at length before, covering its various versions, and as such, I'm not going to go into too much detail here. However, it masterfully combines the maze and platforming elements together into a really good transition. As far as 100%ing goes, you just have to collect all of the Pac-Man letters, all the friends, and complete the mazes. Not unreasonable at all, but enough to encourage completionist and perfectionist play. However, there are a few issues here. Sometimes things are made only accessible by gaining height through butt bouncing on destructible boxes and breaking things with a steel power pellet. Neither of these respawn, and as such, that means you can very easily fail a 100% run of a stage. It can be very frustrating to get deep into a stage, trying to collect everything, only to mess up at the last second and have to start over. Overall, it's a great start, but there's room for improvement. Pac-Man World 2 is probably the one most people are familiar with, and the game does carry a reputation for being hard to 100%. But honestly, this is one of the least frustrating and smooth 100% runs in the entire series. As far as the general structure goes, this is fantastic. 100% completion or aiming for it is optional. All you have to do is get to the end of a stage, but you get a lot more out of the levels if you try to get everything. The levels in the game are fairly linear, but provide more room and more means to explore than something like Crash Bandicoot. Like the first game, you are encouraged to be thorough with your surroundings, but it's done a bit more naturally here. There's less going back and forth over the same ground, and if you know your way around a level, you can plan more efficient routes and find ways to cut down redundancy. Then you can put that knowledge to the test in time trial mode. These are very similar to those in Crash 3, though not as brutal. There aren't any curveballs here. They're just another way to test your familiarity with the level. I really like how when taking it slow and getting everything, you're building up skills that are tested in the time trial mode. Even when playing the game in opposite ways, they both complement each other and work off of the same skill set you're building up. In both cases, you get into this groove of wanting to have the perfect run, and thus between that and the sense of completionism and the presence of elements from the original arcade game, this game really does feel like Pac-Man. For those reasons, Pac-Man World 2 is really satisfying to 100%. That said, while it has a rock-solid foundation, there are still issues and annoyances to be had. One thing I hear a lot of people complain about is having to get all of the fruit and pack dots, with many wishing that it would save which ones you've collected and which ones you haven't, and leave only those in subsequent playthroughs. However, I think this is missing the point of the game. It's supposed to be arcadey and built around completionism and perfectionism in a single run, so those changes would undermine that and future playthroughs. What I do think is an issue is the act of keeping track of what you've collected and what you haven't. You're only shown how many of each item you've collected, and when you collect all of them, you'll get a message on screen, but no other visual signifier after that. I think either showing the totals or adding check marks, or even an all items collected message, would go a long way here. I also think that one thing that Pac-Man World 1 does better is score. When you leave a Galaxian maze or die, the enemies respawn, thus giving more opportunities to boost your score. However, instead of just increasing the skill ceiling by adding more variability, this becomes exploitable to the point where the score doesn't have that much meaning. Also, getting a good score doesn't get you anything. So while eating all of the dots, fruit, and collecting all the tokens feels highly incentivized, killing the enemies doesn't. Thankfully, this isn't as big a deal in this game, as score isn't the thing incentivizing you to 100%. the arcade games and extras are. Still though, it would be nice to still have your score mean something, and for that score to not be as exploitable. Then there's the matter of what version you play. I usually play the GameCube version, not only because it's the version I grew up with, but also because of the faster loading times, rock-solid performance, and increased draw distance. This is why it's also the version that speedrunners tend to gravitate towards. The PS2 version has some graphical effects that the GameCube version is missing, but also has half of the draw distance, which makes 100%ing levels like Blade Mountain far more of a pain. The Xbox version is the worst of the console versions. It has the most uneven performance and most frame drops. However, it does have a widescreen mode, which activates if you set your console to widescreen in the system settings. That should be pretty cool, right? No, it makes things a million times worse. The widescreen is cropped, and the game is very clearly designed around the original screen height. So Pac-Man jumps partially off screen, you miss information the level design was built to give you, and it's just overall one of the worst ways you can play this game. I say one of the worst because the PC version exists, which is basically a broken port of the Xbox version with awful Star Force DRM attached that prevents it from working on any Windows version after XP. So if you want the optimal Pac-Man World 2 100% experience, play the GameCube version. However, no matter what version you play, there are still short sections and levels that can cause a huge headache. Volcanic Panic has this one section where you rev roll off of a moving and tilting platform, and you have to be conscious of where you are on the platform and how your weight impacts the angle. Not so much of an issue during regular play, but this quickly becomes annoying in time trials where death means a complete restart of the entire stage. On that note, the slides in Magma Opus. These are just a pain in general, as you can very easily lose control without knowing why. However, I figured it out. It took nearly 20 years, but I figured it out. You can't use the bottom half of the analog stick. Doing so just reads as a neutral position. So, while that sounds alright on paper, the issue is that these slides have some pretty wide curves, so you'll quite likely be tempted to rotate the stick to match them, which will lead to your untimely death. Thankfully, in standard play, there are checkpoints after each slide. However, time trials require that you go through all of them without dying once. Hell. Then there are these Pac-Dot arcs and Haunted Boardwalk where you need to be pixel perfect as to where you land on each platform. Otherwise, the platforms won't fall at the right angle, you'll miss Pac-Dots, have to die, and then start from the checkpoint again until you get them all. Then there's Yellow Pac-Marine. This level is randomized, and as such, so are all the items. This can lead to some less than ideal placement. So is it fair to say that 100%ing the game presents more issues with it than standard play? Yes, absolutely. It would be foolish to say otherwise. However, I think you can say the same thing about a lot of games, and the worst things about this game are more momentary than systemic. Is it perfect? No, but it lays down a damn good foundation and serves as one of the absolute best 100% quests in this video. Help me.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Pac-N-Roll Let's Play.
Oh my goodness, look at the little man, not me! Oh!
Pac-N-Roll is a very good game. It's very much in the vein of Pac-Man World 1 and 2, but with more of a monkey ball or marble madness twist to it. Using the DS stylus, you roll Pac-Man in the direction you want to move him. It works quite well, the levels are fun, the presentation is great, this is just a good time. That is if you're playing it casually, or just trying to get all the dots in a level. If you plan to do more than that, well, I hope you're hydrated because you're going to be screaming a lot. Just getting everything in the levels is mostly fine. But we do get the designers putting Pac-Dots in places that are kind of ridiculous for a low-res 3D game on a tiny glare-filled DS screen. However, that's not too big of a deal breaker. Pac-Man World 2 had the best 100% quest so far, and it had its fair share of annoying bits too. No, the deal breaker is the No, the deal breaker is the horrid, rancid time trial mode. Now, in Pac-Man World 2, I praised the inclusion of time trials because they took the knowledge you built up by being thorough at the levels and tested you on it in a different way. This doesn't do that. Instead, it's more concerned with knocking you to the ground, spitting on you, and stomping on your balls and or tits. Is everyone wincing in response to that visual? Good! Pac-N-Roll's time trials not only have absurdly short deadlines, but they add a ton of boxes in the way, and also, instead of just charging through the level, you also have to hit every checkpoint. But these aren't the checkpoints in the levels, because that would make too much sense. These are placed all over the off-beaten paths and areas. This also reveals a quirk of the controls. Pac-Man either has a really high max speed or doesn't have a limit at all. It all depends on how fast you can flick your wrists. Of course, the average player probably hasn't noticed this because it's completely irrelevant during standard play. A lot of the main game is taking things slow, being precise and thorough. There's never really a reason to be going that fast. So between that and the differences in box and checkpoint placement, this game is testing you on skills that you never got the chance to build up, even after bashing your head in, spending hours upon hours trying to do the first level. It becomes clear that no matter what prior knowledge you have to be perfect. Scratch that, you have to be better than perfect. You have to be utterly inhuman as you flick your wrists with enough speed to drill through concrete while also knowing exactly what route to take, while also avoiding all the bullshit crates and not once stopping, slowing down, lightly touching anything other than the ground, or otherwise messing up. Who in their right mind would actually do this, let alone for every stage in the game? Oh, hang on a second, my girlfriend's calling me. Hello?
I did it
Why?
because it was funny.
Hey everyone, it's me, Jackie Xcoy. Yay. So since I have 100%ed this game, I might as well share my own thoughts on it. Something Luna didn't mention are the gems and challenges. Gems are basically the main collectible when it comes to 100%ing this game. Kind of like tokens in Pac-Man World 2. You get gems by collecting all dots in levels, beating time trials, beating challenges, and finding them hidden in levels. The challenges are altered versions of the main levels with specific goals. Eat all the dots, eat all the ghosts, avoid eating dots or ghosts. Sometimes they require you to reach the goal after completing one of these tasks, or sometimes the objective is just getting to the goal. All the challenges have time limits, but unlike the time trials, they are usually pretty reasonable. They also don't feel like you're just playing the same levels again, as they change the placement of items, obstacles, and even where you start and where the goal is. Something I find pretty cool is that if you fail a challenge, you're still free to explore the level, letting you practice or plan ahead for your next attempt. As for the time trials, I think whether or not you succeed depends on what model of DS you're playing on. While I played this on a DS Lite, Cutie McCuteface over here has played it on the original DS. When trying it on an original DS myself, I found that the smaller stylus and poorly lit screen made it more difficult. If you're gonna try to 100% this game, do it on a DS Lite, or a DSi or 3DS. Just avoid the original. The time trials are still pretty ridiculously hard, but at least you'll be able to see where you're going. That doesn't negate Luna's criticisms, considering Pac-N-Roll was an early DS title released before the Lite or any of these other models. But run 100%ing this game, despite all the hell the time trials get you through, is definitely 100% worth it. You know why? You get a little blue Golvis on the title screen.
To be fair, there is some neat post-game content. You get the original maze game, of course, you get the E3 demo level, and you get a recreation of the original maze in the base game's engine. However, for what you have to go through in order to get those things, it's really not worth it. It's too small a reward for too much unadulterated agony. There's a reason this video is called I Tried 100%ing every Pac-Man platformer, and it's because of this game. For way too long, this right here was my white whale. I drove myself to madness just trying to do the time trial for the first fucking level. These time trials are pure evil, and I hope they rot in hell. Is Pac-N-Roll for the DS otherwise a good game? Yes, but for the love of God, don't try 100%ing it if you know what's good for you. Alright, hopefully the next game will be better. So we're back to Pac-Man World 2, but this time it's the rather infamous Game Boy Advance version. In general, this is not a good game. Given the faithfulness to the arcade game, the World games generally benefit from shorter stages, but these are long and drawn out. They take the style of backtracking from World 1, but go really overboard with it. World 1 adopted that style to encourage the player to be thorough, spend a decent amount of time in an area and really interact with it as opposed to just strolling through it. Here, it's just padding as you're just going to be walking back and forth long stretches. You know, I think Scott Rogers, the designer of World 1, said something about this sort of thing in his book. What was it? Oh yeah, walking is never gameplay. Also, the controls are extremely sluggish and stiff, especially when jumping. So you're just barely able to make jump. It really feels like they designed the stages around Pac-Man being able to cover more ground and then slowed him down near the end of development. Then there's the overabundance of insta-kill hazards, which would be one thing on its own. The console game that this is based on has a lot of bottomless pits, and it really works there. However, here, because of the stiff jumping, you're going to want to be as close to the edge as possible when starting your jump, but when you press the button, you end up butt bouncing directly into a pit because it can be tricky to tell when the platform stops and the pit begins. Also, with it being a Game Boy Advance game, the screen crunch is a huge issue, especially in stages with an emphasis on verticality. Oh well, at least it looks nice. There are some neat ideas here, like if you rev roll on water, you skip like a stone, and the flip kick being able to cancel out a rev roll so you can perform a rev roll jump. I also find it kind of funny how in this game, Wormwood is a boss fight, but overall, this is just not fun to play. So that's just the act of playing the game normally. What about 100%ing it? Well, it's even worse. So remember how in the console game, it didn't tell you how much of each fruit you needed while in the stage? Well, this is worse. You have a single fruit count, and no, you're not given the total here either. There are different kinds of fruit in a stage, but it will all be cherries in the end. Collect a banana? Nope, cherries. In the end, the cherries conquer all. So the different types end up confusing things and making it harder to tell when you've collected everything or not. This is especially a problem with hidden lower sections in bottomless pit-ridden stages, which is a lot of them. There's also little point in going for 100%. There are hidden Galaxians in some of the stages that will unlock mazes you can play in Pac Village. Except for the last one. Yeah, even when you get the last one, the corresponding door in the village doesn't unlock. I think now is a good time to mention that the last password in the game before the spooky boss fight doesn't work. Did I mention that this game feels extremely unfinished? Okay, the last two games have been utter hell, but it's gonna look up soon. The next game will be better. It will. It has to. Pac-Man World 3 is a very strange game in the series, but a lot of people know that by now. It seems every few years we hear more about how there were grander plans for it, whether it allegedly had the involvement of Don Bluth under the name Pac-Man Adventures, or was cancelled mid-development before the developers Blitz Games self-financed the rest of development, thus leaving a lot of the features on the cutting room floor, how it was originally going to be more of an open-world Jak and Daxter affair, as well as general information on how the development was just kind of a mess. The game, while having some fans, is often mentioned with the stigma of being the disappointing and rather baffling follow-up to World 1 and 2. This game ends up being one of those platformers in the mid-2000s that really tried to follow the mold of Jak 2, with a heavier emphasis on combat and an edgier, darker tone. This was a trend that now isn't thought back on very fondly, at least not unironically. The combat ends up being very simplistic, as you have no defensive options, you can't string moves together, and only one of your moves was built from the ground up for combat, thus leaving the other two less efficient for it. And if you're just trying to go straight to the end of these stages, it takes up way too much of what you're doing in each stage. It brings the game to a halt despite inheriting a gameplay formula that encourages constant movement. Blitz games were very clearly passionate about the maze games and had some base understanding about what the world games did, but it doesn't seem like they either understood or got to fully act upon what these styles have in common and how they correlate. I say they had a base understanding of how the prior world games worked because when you take your time and try to get everything, you're spending less time in these monotonous exercises of pressing the same button over and over again, and more time running through these linear but open levels, being thorough with your environments, and eating fruit and dots. As such, it feels far more like a Pac-Man game when aiming for 100%. At least at first, but we'll get to that. It also helps that the levels are more open and even a little more maze-like than the prior two games. We also have some welcome structural changes. We have totals for every fruit type listed in the UI, which is nice, and we have some high score tables for each level, which would have been a lot of fun to have in the prior games. I say prior games and not here because the pacing doesn't really incentivize the player to replay stages. The levels in this game are relentlessly long. Even a minimalist run can take the time it would normally take to get through entire worlds in the prior games. And of course, a completionist run would take even longer. So if you get to the end of a stage after almost an hour and realize a tiny thing here or there you could have done differently, you're going to be far less likely to replay the stage as you would be in the prior games. These games are built on arcade elements and sensibilities, but while this game tries to continue and expand on those elements, they don't fit the design and pacing of the stages. The game is contradicting and undermining itself. Then we get to the game starting to pull Crash 4 bullshit in the later stages, with fruit and collectibles being hidden in really dickish ways. 100%ing levels becomes very frustrating because of this, and we haven't even talked about the trading cards yet. So there are these unlockable trading cards in the game. Some you get in the stages themselves, and others you earn through unspecified criteria. Before doing it for this video, I assumed that the others you earned by 100%ing each level. Nope. It turns out, much like life, the reality is far stupider. It turns out the trading cards are effectively an achievement board that doesn't tell you what the achievements are. This was already really frustrating to learn, and there's nothing stating how far along in each objective you are. You are just completely blind. This would be bad enough, but it gets worse. After understandably getting confused by this, I looked up a guide on how to get all of them. Not only does there not seem to be a universal consensus of what action results in what card, but allegedly, if you don't get certain cards before beating the game, you will never be able to. Replaying stages doesn't count. You are just completely locked out from getting them. You want them? Delete your save file and play the whole game again, while keeping in mind this information that the game doesn't even tell you. So yeah, this game still sucks. The pain has to be over now, right? There aren't even that many platformers in the series left. Let's see, up next is Pac-N-Roll Remix. Actually, this one was piss easy. This is overall a very stripped down port of the DS game, with all of the cutscenes, post-game content, and even an entire world of the base game removed. However, while the time trials in the original game were just evil incarnate, here, they're way too easy. You just have to beat each stage within 10 minutes. You can comfortably get all of the dots, get to the end, and make it within that time in a single run of each stage. The only added difficulty is the final world, which isn't really that great. A lot of the new stages are incredibly linear gauntlets that have some really cheap level design, but at the same time, there isn't much skill separation between 100%ing a stage and just beating it due to how straightforward the levels are. That, and they don't really match the other levels that were in the original. Pac-N-Roll Remix is very weird. When just playing through it to the end, it's a noticeable downgrade from the DS original. However, when going for 100%, it's not actively out for your kidneys. Depending on what you're looking for and what your playstyle is, you might prefer one over the other. Personally, I'll just stick to the relatively restrained playthroughs of the DS original. Pac-Man Tilt is one that goes under the radar a lot. It was part of Pac-Man and Galaga Dimensions on 3DS, which was one of the earlier games on the system before it really had a chance to take off. This is more simplistic in terms of mechanics and design than the other platformers, but with one major gimmick. You shift the gravity by tilting the 3DS. It's a decent enough game and it's well executed for what it is. While prior games like World 2 separated collecting everything and testing how fast you can beat a stage for 100%, here you're being judged by both criteria at once, which is a neat change of pace. It's like if Pac-N-Roll Remix's system was actually done well. That said, this game isn't really for me. Oh no, I always found this one to be a little janky. Now we arrive at the controversial Ghostly Adventures era, starting with Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures on the Xbox 360, PS3, Wii U, and PC. Though, good luck playing that last one now. This was the first new 3D platformer in the series for quite a while, and that alone was exciting for me back when the game was announced. Not only that, but this was a time where there weren't a lot of 3D platformers, and what ones were coming out were extremely linear, littered with 2D sections, and artificially extended. Whereas this, while retaining the point A to point B nature of prior entries, was tantalizingly open with sprawling levels ready for the player to explore. This, of course, excited me even more. However, as the excitement faded and as more games like this came out, the more I realized that this game is extremely okay. There's nothing groundbreaking about it, there's nothing terrible about it. Well, except for the final boss, it kind of stunk, but it's just okay. Wait, what was that I just said? Nothing terrible about it. No more faulty gyroscope tech, no more bullshit. No more sadistic time trials, no more bullshit. No more trading cards, no more bullshit. No more hellish slide sections, no more bullshit. No more bullshit, no more bullshit! I think I'm gonna like this game. So yes, there's a distinct lack of absurd hoops and hurdles you have to navigate in order to 100% the game. But there's also not much here. The game already has you play certain stages and collect a certain number of pack dots in order to progress. There are extra levels you can play which can help with the latter. There are arcade games you can unlock and play based on games like Defender and Stun Runner, with multiple stages that you can beat. However, playing the game for 100% and playing the game normally are not that different from each other. There are achievements, but they're mostly the things you'd get for just playing the game normally. It also doesn't help that there isn't really a score system, and there's not much promoting the player to replay stages to perfect them. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad game. Quite far from it, it's just underdeveloped structurally. Now, if you want a bad game based on Ghostly Adventures, look at the 3DS game with the same name. This is, without exaggeration, the least Pac-Man platformer in the series history. It has similar mechanics to the console game, but instead of trying to find ways to make it feel as close to the original arcade game as possible, like most of the prior games we've covered have tried to do, the levels and structure are just modeled after Super Mario Bros. However, it's not like there's no connection to the prior games, as it has some of the same mistakes. Having one chance per run to get an item in a stage with that chance being easy to screw up like in World 1, here, more prevalent and far worse. Mechanics being less clear than they should be, a la Pac-in-Time, here. Not realizing you missed stuff until you beat the stage, a la World 2, here. Super sluggish controls like in World 2 GBA, here. Asinine hiding places being stopped in your tracks repeatedly for combat sections, and the rewards being images like in World 3, here. Oh god, I'm not doing this again. But don't worry, this game may look generic, but it certainly is original when it comes to what bullshit it introduces into the series. So, many of the graphic pieces and collectibles are gated behind the different power berries, which have a limited quantity, can run out, and you have to unlock by playing the stage it's introduced on. Not to mention that there are enemies that you have no way to deal with if you don't have the right power berry, so you really do need to start the game by prioritizing the berries. So if they're so essential, you'd think they'd be in the first 4 levels, right? No, they're in the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. So yes, there's some trial and error in order to figure out which stages have them and which stages don't. Well, in that case, all you'd need to do is pause the game and hit exit stage, right? Wrong. That has to be unlocked by beating the stage 2. Oh, did you realize that the stage doesn't have the right power berry? Or did you mess up your one shot to get something right? Too bad, restart your 3DS. But that shouldn't be too likely. It should be pretty easy to figure out which one is where, right? Like the ice berry, you should find it in the ice level, right? No, that's where you find the fire berry. Wanna guess which one has the ice berry? It's in the stage themed after Pac-Man Championship Edition. So with some stages, you need to play them in order to get the right berries, then you have to play them again in order to get all of the graphic pieces and figures, which is unlikely to happen. Plus, you have to upgrade the berries, which unlocks more mechanics, which, yes, allows you to break specific boxes, which allow you to access graphic pieces that were previously gated off from you. There is so much waiting in the game. You have these tank sections with Spiral. I'm not touching anything. Then you have these boss fights. So with this much asinine padding, the pressure is on to get this stuff right the first time, so you have to play these levels as little as possible. However, when backtracking to make sure you got everything, you start to realize just how barren these stages are. What about the positives though? Well, the scoring system is a little neat. The multiplier lasts as long as you don't touch the ground. The game doesn't really do anything really interesting with it, but it's something. That and the music is generally pretty great. However, there are scoring systems in other Pac-Man platformers that are handled far better than this, and good music in this series is honestly more of an expectation rather than something to be surprised about. I don't think 100%ing this game reaches the same degree of pain as some of the others, but it's not worth it at all. Is this the worst platformer in the series? I guess technically not, but it's definitely the one with the least redeeming qualities. It's not interestingly bad, it's just boring and really irritating to play. So we've had an okay game, a bad game, so to even it out, let's play a good game. Hell, calling this game good is actually underselling it. This game is not only really good, not only does it provide one of the best 100% runs out of the platformers in the series, but it's, in my opinion, the most criminally overlooked Pac-Man game to date. Like, a lot of Pac-Man games get overlooked by the general public, but usually those games are celebrated by the fandom. This game, on the other hand, is overlooked within the fandom as well. I've talked about the platforming, varied scenarios, outstanding soundtrack, and great enemy design before, but the cherry on top here is the scoring and medal system. You can get bronze, silver, or gold medals on a mission depending on your score.
Pac Squadron, can you read me?
But the requirements to get gold medals is often quite high. This then causes you to reevaluate how you're playing the levels, and you soon start to see how deliciously high the skill ceiling can be. Unlike games like World 2, just getting everything isn't enough. You have to perfect the level. This means scoring high combos. You start to analyze your surroundings, trying to rack up multipliers by collecting tokens, scaring and disarming ghosts, and finding the perfect path to eat them all in. This gets intensely satisfying. There isn't really any post-game reward to shoot for, but the act of doing it is fun and rewarding on its own. Now we arrive at Pac-Man World Repack. I've talked about this game before when it came out, and even still I talked about the original World 1 here. However, the tweaks Repack makes to World 1's 100% quest are very welcome ones. It makes tweaks to the design and respawn of stage elements to prevent the player from screwing themselves over, and it's far more transparent about bonuses and how the score tallies up. This sounds simple, but it makes a huge difference. You end up trying to perfect the levels, stringing together as many power pellets in the mazes, trying to do it all as efficiently as possible as the game tracks how long you've been playing. You end up trying to get the perfect run, not just in each individual stage, but throughout the whole game. This game has only been out for like a year, but I can't tell you how many times I've started a new game from scratch and just tried to do the whole thing as efficiently and skillfully as possible. Frankly, this is the most comfortable and consistently fun 100% run in the entire series. So now we've covered them all, and wow, that was a roller coaster ride. We start effectively with a good foundation with a flawed execution, and a great iteration working off of it, to near constant misfires before effectively going full circle and improving what the earlier entries tried to do. It's funny too because Pac-Man has always been about perfectionism and completionism ever since 1980. So given that, it's kind of crazy to see how the whole completionism angle has been such a struggle here, especially when the first games to try it more or less got it right. As for which games fall where, I'd say Repack, World 2, and Ghostly Adventures 2 are on top, whereas the worst ones are World 2 GBA, World 3, and Pac-N-Roll, with that last one being the most disproportionately bad in comparison to the rest of the game. World 2 GBA is probably the worst full stop, given how awful the experience is the whole time, mixed with how you're merely rewarded with broken promises. I feel like this is the aspect of the platformers that has the most room for improvement, and hopefully future entries, official or otherwise, can learn from the successes and failures of the past.